National Geographic, there was an article that said a man by the name of Michael Packard, he was a lobster diver. He was diving in Massachusetts in the Cape Cod, and a humpback whale swallowed him, and after about 30 seconds, he described it. He said he was swimming and just all of a sudden he heard this whooshing sound and he was in total darkness. And before he actually knew what was going on, he felt this pressure and felt that he was stuck in something, and he couldn't see where he was at all. And in about 30 seconds, and he said that was the longest 30 seconds of his life, the whale spat him out. So he was actually engulfed. He wasn't really swallowed. He didn't go inside the stomach of the whale at all. He was just in his mouth. And this was a humpback whale. So if you know anything about humpback whales, the National Geographic says that it was describing how it is impossible to be swallowed by a whale, because whales have baleen inside them, which is like almost like hair-like structures at the back of their throat. And their throat, or their esophagus, is actually the size of a fist. So nothing big can go in there. And they eat things like krill and really, really tiny fish. And so what this mesh inside their body does, or inside their mouth does, is filter everything. And the water is spat back out, and whatever they caught in that big mouthful of water is what they will eat. And it goes down their small little esophagus. That being said, there are a lot of whales that have baleen, this fiber-like structure inside their mouth, like a filter. And that could be also humpback whales, blue whales, grey whales, and mink as well. There is only one whale that could possibly swallow a human being, never have, but possibly do it, or it hasn't been recorded, is a sperm whale. And the sperm whale actually feeds on giant squid of about close to 46 feet. Some have been recorded to be found inside the stomach of a sperm whale. And sperm whales can grow up to 65 feet, so their mouths are massive, and so when they open up, they can actually swallow it, and their esophagus is big enough to swallow a giant squid, so it can swallow a man as well. But they haven't ever recorded anyone being swallowed by a whale. They said in this article in National Geographic that it would be a 1 in a million chance. So we're going to be talking about that 1 in a million chance in the book of Jonah. So I'd invite you to open your books, your Bibles, to the book of Jonah. Now, I know that this is a famous story and everyone knows the story, so we are going to dissect it into 3 different sections. The first part we are going to name the call. So in Jonah chapter 1 and verse 1, the Lord God, and here we know that this is Jesus before he was on the earth, because he identifies himself as Adonai. So this is Jesus now speaking to Jonah, and he says to him, arise and go to Nineveh, and I'm reading verse 2, that great city. And by the way, it was called a great city because it was as large as, if you started on the one end and you walked to the other end, it will take you 3 days. So it was a big city. And they had about 120,000 people living there at the time. Now, when they say 120,000 people, they only count the men in a Bible record. So you can imagine it was a very big city with women and children as well. Anyway, so he says, go to that great city and cry against it, for their wickedness is come up before me. And then we won't get into what Jonah did right then, but we're talking about the call. Jonah was called to give a message, to cry against this city because of their wickedness that had come up. And we all get a call at some point in our lives, don't we? if you haven't, wait for it, you will get it. I remember when I was called to ministry, and I was called to go to South Korea. At the time, I was 20 years old, and I didn't know anything about South Korea, didn't know the language. In fact, I must admit to my ignorance, I didn't know where it was. And so in 2000, it wasn't that easy to look up things as easily as we do it now on our phones. And so I was at work at the time, and I worked at Pfizer Laboratories in South Africa. And so I was researching about South Korea. And they don't speak English there, so anyway, I was called by a lay pastor who had visited South Korea, and there was a church in need of a missionary urgently. So I had applied 2 years before, just out of high school. I had applied to go to Frontier Missions, and I was really excited about becoming a missionary. But they never answered, and I didn't even get a letter coming back from them. So I had given up. But at this time, the call came, and it was South Korea. And I went and I told my boss that I will be going to become a missionary. And I was going to give up my position there at Pfizer. I was in sales at the time, but I was only the executive assistant to the national manager, and I was going to actually take up the role of a medical rep. So with that came a lot of advantages. An apartment, a car, and travel expenses, and my brother would be sponsored by the company to study further as well. So there was a lot of advantage in staying and taking that promotion that was soon to come up. But I left it all, and I decided that I was going to go to South Korea, to a place that I had never even imagined. So my boss told me I was crazy. And even crazier still, because I was only going to give him 2 weeks' notice when I was supposed to give a month. And he said, what are you going to do there? So I said, I'm going to teach Bible at our school. So he said, you're going to teach Bible studies. Okay, you know that you're up for this promotion, right? I mean, you are the youngest employee at Pfizer at the moment, and no one is given these opportunities. You haven't even been with us that long. But you're going to give that up and go to Korea. So what do you know about Korea? And I said, nothing. And so he said, where will you stay? So I said, I don't know. And he said, how much will you get paid? Because I was getting paid an amazing amount at Pfizer. They pay really well. And I was supporting my family with that money. And he said, how much will you be paid as a missionary? So I said, I'm not sure. I think it might even be voluntary. I'm not sure. I might be given a stipend or something like that. So he said, you didn't ask any of these questions? And I said, I didn't. So he said, well, I think it's crazy. Anyway, it's your life. Do it whatever you want to do, but you've got to speak to our director. And because you're only giving 2 weeks notice, she can actually keep you to your contract. So I said, all right, I'll go and speak to her. And so I went and I spoke to her, and I hadn't communicated with her at all, other than passing her in the passageway and saying hi, but I'd never sat down for a meeting with her ever. So in the 2 years that I was there at Pfizer, and so she spoke to me and she said, yeah, Brian, who is my boss, mentioned that you don't know anything about where you're going. You don't know what you'll be paid, you don't know where you'll be staying. It sounds a bit unreasonable to him that someone as young, who has their whole career ahead of them, would give it up to go and teach Bible studies, he said. So I said, yep, but that's what I really want to do, and I feel called by God to do it. And out of her drawer, she pulls out her Bible, and I didn't even know she was a Christian, and she read with me, and she said that she had wanted to become a missionary before she started working. And she said, I never gave myself that chance. And she read out the Great Commission. And she said to me, go with my blessing. But she said, although your Provident Fund and everything else that you've been saving for the last 2 years, that would be our super here, you could not get that because you didn't give the correct notice or period of notice. So you would forfeit that. So I said, that's okay, that's fine. But on my farewell, almost 2 weeks later, she came and she gave me a big card and everyone had signed it. And in it, they had taken up a collection. And she backdated my resignation so that I got my Provident Fund, plus a 13th check that I didn't deserve. And I was able to pay for my brother's studies and everything. So off I went to Korea. And it was the most foreign place I had ever been. And no one understood me. But I learned to speak Korean. Charades. Yes, actually, I used to draw pictures, so it was more like Pictionary than charades. Yes, especially when you go to a restaurant in Korea, I had to draw a picture of a little pig and say, no pig, you know, X on the pig. And then they didn't know that bacon is also made from pigs. So you would sometimes get ham, and they would say, no, it's no pig meat, only ham. So I would then add to my drawings little shellfish and prawns and all kinds of crabs and stuff because that's what they have there. And I got a big wake-up call. You know, the Korean people are really good to, once they welcome you inside their home, you're part of the family, but you've got to embrace their culture. And you've got to embrace their language. And yes, they are learning English from foreign missionaries, but when you make an effort to speak their language, that really carries through. And I had this experience, and it is an unforgettable experience. I was supposed to teach a group of people that had only come there for one session only, and they'd accompanied their children for an awards night, like a speech night. So there were parents, grandparents, and all the students that we had been teaching. And that particular day, my translator was sick, and she wasn't there. And I was supposed to give a little bit of a Bible story, and they couldn't understand me at all. And my Korean was so basic that I couldn't possibly have said it in Korean. And I prayed to God, and I said, I have to touch their hearts, and I know what I'm saying in English is not getting there. Please just help me. And believe it or not, and many of you probably will not believe, but I spoke fluent Korean. And I was able to tell the Bible story in Korean. It's the one and only time I preached in Korean, and that was the Spirit moving, just like he did in the time of Pentecost. And I spoke Korean fluently that afterwards they asked me, oh, you speak Korean, and they were speaking to me in Korean, and I said, my Korean is so small, and I haven't been able to speak that fluently ever since. I have studied more Korean since then, and I can speak Korean now, but I think maybe I'm close to a 6-year-old who speaks very well in Korean, but not more than that. But that experience showed me that when God calls you, he will also qualify you for that call. And that has been my experience. Not so with Jonah. Jonah may have had the skills, and I believe that he was an animated preacher, but he didn't want to go to Nineveh. So the second point in the book of Jonah that we're going to summarize, the first was the call, and the second is the attitude. So Jonah, and if you read the Pen of Inspiration, tells us that he hated the Ninevites. He did not want to bring the message to them. In fact, he thought they were worthy of death. And he thought that if he went and proclaimed the truth there, that God in his mercy would not do what he said he would do, and Jonah would be embarrassed, that he preached doom and gloom, and you will be destroyed in 40 days, and God doesn't like all this wickedness. In fact, it came up to him, and he thought he would destroy you, but he knew God better, and he said, if I went, I would be like a false prophet, and God might save these people. So I won't go. That was his attitude. And he decided to go and take a ship to Tarshish, which was in the opposite direction of Nineveh completely. And that's exactly what he did. And I loved what Brad did. That was a wonderful enactment. Why didn't you guys get it? I mean, when you saw him dive across the stage, that was just brilliant. I didn't know you were such a wonderful actor. We need to put this skill to use. Thank you so much, Kelly, for being that wonderful whale, although she didn't know what she was, right? She was just going this way. Anyway, whales usually swallow from the bottom, so it doesn't really matter how she opened that mouth, whether it was which way, but it was wonderful. And so Jonah had decided he will disobey. He heard what God said in the call, but he wasn't interested in becoming a false prophet. And so he decided that he would go in the opposite direction. And hopefully, 40 days would pass. By the time he finally reached Nineveh, it would be time for destruction. So I don't know the kind of, time frame that was in his head, whether he thought God was going to only start the 40 days from the time he spoke to Jonah, or only when Jonah reached there, 40 days would start. I think 40 days would start once he reached there. That would be fair, right? Because then they'd have some time to prepare. But Jonah thought differently, and he thought by the time he finally reaches back to where he was in his hometown, they would already be destroyed, because their wickedness could not last that long. God knew better. And we know our God is a merciful God, and he will not just destroy people without giving them some warning. Now, if we look at Jonah's attitude, we see it all throughout the book of Jonah. And if you go to, still in the same chapter, chapter 1, and you realize now that he has fled and he is now on this boat. And I'm sure you know the story, how it goes. Verse 10 tells us that the people on the boat were all fearful for their lives, and they started throwing things out of the boat so that the boat would not crash, or the ship would not crash or sink. And they were certain that the storm was coming after someone on that boat. And now they knew it was Jonah, because verse 10 tells us he told them it was him that the storm was after. Now, many people don't regard storms in that way anymore. When there's a huge storm on the sea, we don't think that that storm is after anyone, but they did in those days. And the storm seemed to be lashing only on their ship. So they thought the gods, and they didn't know our God, they thought the gods were doing this, and they were after somebody on the ship. And when they woke Jonah up, they told him, come on, scream and pray to your gods, because we're all doing that, and why are you sleeping here? How could he possibly be sleeping on this ship that was rocking and rocking? Well, you can't wake someone who's intentionally sleeping, right? So he was planning on ignoring the storm. He knew it was God. And he knew that God wasn't happy with what he had done. And he knew that God was after him, and that God was pursuing him no matter where he went. So he was ignoring God. And you see the relationship between Jonah and his God? That's the kind of relationship we can have with him. You can fight with God when he calls you to do something, and you can go against him, but eventually he has his way. And you'll end up where you need to be, whether you stink like fish afterwards, but you will end up where he wants you to be. So Jonah has this attitude where he doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. And he knows God, he knows how God is, that God won't strike him dead. He's not that type of God. No lightning bolts from the sky coming Jonah's way. So he says to the people in verse 12, throw me in. You throw me in, because he doesn't want to take responsibility and kill himself, because then he won't have any time to repent. He knows it. He knows how things work. So he says, you throw me in, because then it's on their heads. And they're unbelievers anyway. So he feels like, let them perish too. Right? Do you see the attitude? So in verse 14, they are now crying to God, our God. And they name him. They're also calling him Adonai. And they're saying, please don't let this innocent blood be on our hands, but we've got to do something, okay? And after he assured them that the only way you're going to get this storm to stop and the only way you're going to survive is if you throw me in, they finally decided in verse 15, they threw him in. So I saw the way Brad dived that way, but it wasn't that way. You know, that would have been head first, and he would have been intentionally doing it. And if you were Jonah, I guess you would have jumped in. Jonah was a bit of a coward, and he didn't want to take any responsibilities, so he asked them to throw him in. Maybe they threw him head first. Yeah? But in any case, they don't know what happened with Jonah. But the moment they threw him into the sea, the storm died down. And then the Bible tells us they were terrified of the God of Jonah. And they knew that they had just thrown a prophet of this God into the sea. And so when they landed, wherever they landed, the Pen of Inspiration tells us that they spread the word. And they said there was this man of God who had been running away from God. God had called him to go to Nineveh, and they told the whole story. But we threw him into the sea and he's gone. So people on the shores all around thought that Jonah was dead, that these men on board that ship killed the prophet of God. And now they were all waiting for the vengeance of this God who can calm the seas, and they were terrified. So when people are afraid, word spreads even faster, okay? And so we don't know where they were from. We don't know if they were from Joppa or if they were from Tarshish, and where was the ship going. We know it was going to Tarshish. We don't know if it was going back to Nineveh or which route it was taking. But the word had spread all around that a prophet of the God of Israel had been killed. And so now they were waiting for judgment. The second portion of, the next portion of this, the attitude continues, but we will get back to that. I wanted to take this story home and ask Windsor Church today, do you have that spirit of Jonah? Are there some people that you think they're not just worth saving? Maybe the message doesn't need to reach them. They won't listen anyway. They're so far gone that they couldn't possibly know the truth the way we Adventists know it. And so we'll stick to our people like us. I'll tell you why I ask. It's because working at ADRA in Macquarie Fields, and the offering is going to the MacArthur schools, and I'm so happy about that because we need to get more people into those Adventist schools, and that's the way we reach them with the message. And the MacArthur School is doing really well there in Macquarie Fields, and I'm just down the road from it in the ADRA Community Centre. And I've been dealing with a lot of volunteers that have just been flowing in since I joined. And I'm going to tell you, the people in MacArthur or in Macquarie Fields and Campbelltown, they're a rough crowd. And you see them covered with tattoos, and they're always drinking something or smoking something, and sometimes they come into our center high as a kite, but they are there, and you know, they are so receptive. When we speak or we read from the Bible and we have a Bible discussion, they are interested. So I had 12 of our volunteers join together for a program that's run by the conference, actually. It's called the Journey to Wholeness. And that is like a support group for, or we are studying to be facilitators for a support group for all different types of addicts. So it's not like Alcoholics Anonymous, where they only deal with alcoholics. This is for all types of addictions. And a lot of the churches in different areas run that program. I wonder if Windsor has that program running here. Do you? Not at the moment? Okay, so the training for this is actually happening on the 20th to the 22nd of May with the conference, and they are running the Facilitators Guide program or training for you to hold events like this. So I was doing this at my center, and we were studying beforehand, before joining this training session. And we had all the manuals, and so I was preparing the volunteers. And we had 2 Adventist volunteers, and the rest were all non-Adventist, and one even an atheist. And another one identified herself as a pagan, and she's very into all different types of pagan rituals, but she believes in God. And they were all studying there with us, and wouldn't you know it, at the end of our study session, we'd been studying for about a month. In the 5th week, I was talking about things in the Bible, and they said they are really interested in how I present the Bible. And they hadn't heard these stories told that way, or an interesting way. I mean, I was talking about things relating to addiction, and I said, you know, God used people like Noah, and he was great, and he was counted as righteous, and him and his family were saved, but Noah was an alcoholic. And Noah he used to get so drunk, paralytically drunk, that he was naked when he was drunk, and his son had some strange ideas about seeing their father naked, and so they were not perfect people. And Noah was far from perfect, but God used him anyway. Now, God uses people like Noah. He uses people like Jonah with their prejudice and their pride. And that's the way he gets the job done. And he can use anyone. But unfortunately, when I was studying with these people, the Adventist volunteers that I had didn't want to come anymore and serve at ADRA, because they didn't want to be associated with these people full of tattoos. And 10 of my volunteers decided that they want to take Bible studies towards baptism. And they've been studying, but unfortunately, the examples that I was hoping to have with me, those that are living the Adventist faith, walked away because they didn't want to associate with that kind of crowd. And I'm hoping that Windsor Church is not a church like that. The difficulty that I'm facing now is that when I am studying with this group of 10, and we have some other clients that are also coming to our center that want to take Bible study as well, 13 of them. When I finally get through the Bible series with them, which church do I send them to? And I'm hoping Windsor is one where I can send these people and they won't get that look like, ugh, what are you? Or they won't get those funny comments that you can't be baptized with all these tattoos on you. What are they going to do? They got them before they knew God. And that brings me to another illustration, talking about attitude, because that's the section that we're dealing with in Jonah's story. Steve was preaching in Kenya, and he'd been doing a series there at a camp meeting in New Living Church? New Life? In Nairobi. And so they have these huge camp meetings where thousands of people come, and literally there were more than 7,000 people there. And they did the whole series with Steve, and at the end of the series, there was going to be a baptism. So on one of the evenings, he did an altar call, where he called people forward who wanted to take baptism and make a commitment to Christ. And one particular lady, and she was the first to get up and walk down the aisle. She'd been sitting at the back, and many people had been listening to the messages over the radio, and she was one of them. And so she came to the front first, and she wanted to take baptism. And so every night of the meeting, she was there. And it seemed that as every night progressed, she had brought more and more people with her to come and listen to the message. And on the day when the baptism would happen, and Steve had already spoken to her and was familiar with her story, and she was very excited to learn the truth about Christ, and she wanted to make that commitment to join his church family. And on the day of the baptism, a little boy brought a note to Steve just before he stood up on the stage. And the note read that she wouldn't be able to get baptized and that she was leaving, or she was at the gate. So Steve rushed out and he told them, sing or do something while I'm gone. And he went out to go and speak to this girl. And she was there with about 30 family members and friends, colleagues from work. And this whole group was just standing around her, and she was sitting in the midst of them crying. And when Steve reached her and he found out, why aren't you getting baptized? She was told by the pastor of the church that because of her tattoos, she cannot enter the kingdom of God. So we didn't just lose that one soul, we lost all the people that had been influenced by her life. And no matter what was said to the preacher or the pastor of that church at that point, no matter how upset Steve was, and upon his advice, nothing changed, because they would not allow someone with all those tattoos to get baptized. You say it's sad, and that happened there in Kenya, but here in Australia, it's not very different. That pagan woman who is full of tattoos at my center also wants to study and be baptized. She's actually studying theology right now at a Catholic institute, because she wanted to, she doesn't have the views of a Catholic church, but she wanted to find out why they believe what they believe and be able to combat that. And so we often have these discussions about the Bible, and it's like she's discovering God for the first time. And she's excited about the truth, the way the Adventists know it, because we follow the Bible. But she's not welcome in our church. And if I had to take her to certain churches, they would give her that look. They would make her feel unwelcome. So the call is going out to Windsor Church today. It's going out to our church. Yes. It's going out to Windsor Church today, to our church across the globe. Let us not be so stuck in our ways. Let us open our hearts and embrace these people, no matter who they are. If they are like Ninevites and their evil has reached to the heavens, there is still hope. And the message that went out of Jonah's mouth when he landed there after being vomited out from the whale. And in case you were wondering if this impossibility is certain, that you cannot be swallowed by a whale, we just have to go to Jesus' words. And Jesus says in Matthew 12 and verse 41 or 39 onwards, he's talking about Jonah. And the Pharisees asked for a sign, and he said, you adulterous vipers. You know, and he was talking about how they just go to believe whatever they want to believe instead of believing the truth. And he says, no sign will be given to you except the sign of Jonah. And the sign of Jonah that he was speaking about, and if you could go to Matthew chapter 12, you could read it there. In verse 39, it says, the sign of Jonah will be given to you, that you will know the Son of Man was sent by God for your salvation. And because Jonah was in the belly of the whale, and he identifies it as a whale, not a fish, like in the Old Testament, he says he was inside the belly, not inside the mouth, which is what scientists would have us believe, that it was inside the mouth and couldn't possibly go down that small esophagus of any of the other whales. So maybe it was a sperm whale. And when we are told that he was vomited out in Jonah chapter 2, verse 10, that means he was inside the belly. So this may be an impossible situation. And the message that he was bringing it out of impossibility. Our message that we have to give, that three angels message, that message comes with an impossibility, with fire raining down from heaven. Impossible situation. fire coming out from under the earth, and that the world will be cleansed by fire. Yes, we're preaching fire and brimstone, but it's not the fear that will convict them, but the message of where we're from. And the message that is preached from someone who has been to dark places and who has a dark story to share and who has been down there at the bottom of the oceans and have come out to tell the story, reeking and stinking from everything that they've been through. It's those people that are going to carry that message out to the world. And maybe we don't have that journey. Maybe some of us sitting here have been born Adventists and we've never had those dark roads, or we don't have that dark experience. There are going to come people into our church that have had those experiences. Don't look them up and down. Don't shun them. Just let their story shine. Because when people like that bring their story and how they came out of it and how they found Christ and how he redeemed them, that changes hearts. And we've got to let those stories shine. So when people like that come into the church, ask their story. Publish it. Put it out there, because that's going to bring people in. That lifts Christ up on the cross. And when he is lifted, all people are drawn to him. It's those redemption stories that we need to look for. So we may be called as a church, but we may not have that sermon to preach. Look for the people out there who do have it. Bring them into your churches. Embrace them. Let them be part of you. And then we will see the Adventist church become an Advent movement again. So the last part of this book of Jonah speaks about the second chance. And I'm going to ask you to go to Jonah chapter 3. So in Jonah chapter 3, he is now outside of this whale, and he has preached his message. Oh, he hasn't preached the message yet. God says now, while he's spat out and he's stinky and he's just disgusting, I don't know if he had time to take a bath. Maybe he didn't. And that's what sold it. And so they were like, oh my goodness, this guy didn't die. They didn't kill him. He just came out from the belly of the whale, and he smells like vomit. So you know he was in that belly. There was no denying it. And I don't think that he had time to go and wash and get that smell off. Maybe that's what carried the message. But when he crossed the city, he walked from one end to the city to the other, and that took him 3 days, as long as he was in that belly of the whale. And God tells him, arise now and go to Nineveh, that great city, and tell them the message that I have for them. Now, very interesting is that the name Jonah, does anyone know what it means? Dove. Dove. But what kind of dove? It's a Yonah, yes. But not just any dove. When a Yonah is used, or Jonah is used in English, it is a messenger for the king. So one king could send a message to another king using a dove, using this particular dove. It's called a Jonah. So when they heard the name of the prophet that had been supposedly killed by the people on the ship going to Tarshish, and they saw him appear on the beach of Nineveh, and his name was Jonah, which meant this messenger to the king, the message went straight to the king. And the king understood that when you get a message from another king, it means that there is someone that is about to seize your country. There is danger on the way. Someone is going to destroy you. That's when the Jonah is sent. A Jonah is sent to another king to inform him of impending danger. And so what happened was, the king heard the message, and the king immediately said, everyone fast, animals, children, everyone, we are going to fast, and we are going to pray that God does not destroy us. Give us a second chance. And God is merciful, and he did. But Jonah's attitude was unchanged. Now Jonah's our people, right? And sometimes, no matter what is done for the salvation of others, that may not look the way we look, or act the way we act, or do the things that, or live where we live. When people like that are saved, there are still some in the church that say, they're not worth it. They should be destroyed. They deserve to be destroyed. And here we see Jonah, and he's a silly guy. He's sitting there outside the city, waiting for it to be destroyed. And you can go to chapter 4 for this. And so he goes and he sits there on a little hill, and he's looking at the city and waiting for it to be destroyed. He knows God won't destroy it because the people repented. How can God destroy people who turn from their ways? He doesn't. He is righteous and just to forgive, which is what he did. And so here we see Jonah sitting there, and he says, I told you, when you first told me to go to Nineveh, I told you you would do this. I told you that you wouldn't destroy them. Now he's feeling sorry for himself. So he's very angry, the Bible tells us, and God asks him, does it do you any good to be angry? But he's angry still, and so he says, yes, it does me good to be angry, and I wish I would just die right here. Take my life from me. It is better for me to die than to live. Oh, he's just going dramatic, isn't he? But remember, this is a prophet of God. So he is much like us, more than the Ninevites. And so God says he will let a gourd grow over him to give him some shade because the sunny day is coming. And so the gourd grows over him, and he's very happy for it, and it was really good. And so he's really rejoicing that this gourd is over him while he sits there waiting for the destruction of the city. He refuses to move. He's going to sit there. Maybe the 40th day is coming up, and he wants to see the destruction, which is not going to take place. The doom and gloom is not there. And the sun comes up, and God sends a worm. And I was talking to Steve on the drive here, and he was saying he thinks God was having a bit of fun with Jonah and teasing him a bit, because God has a sense of humor. So he causes this worm to eat the gourd, and the gourd dries up and dies. And so when the sun is there, it's the hottest time of the day, and the gourd is all shriveled up and dies. And now Jonah's even more angry, and he was like, how could this poor gourd die? Poor thing. You know, it shouldn't have died, and he's feeling sorry for the gourd. And God says to him, what good does your anger do? You are so concerned about this little gourd, which you didn't plant, you didn't grow it, you didn't do anything to it. I did it all. And you have so much concern over plants. I mean, some of us have concern over animals and everything else, but we miss having concern for people. And we have that Jonah spirit. But he says to Jonah, how much more should I consider the Ninevites? I made them. I grew them up. Even though they went astray, when they confessed and they cried to me for salvation, how can I not answer them? And that's the merciful God that we serve. So this second chance can also be seen in what Brad read for us in our scripture reading. And I was surprised when he read it that it said the son of John instead of the son of Jonah. So if you were reading John chapter 21, and I'm just going to go there. John chapter 21, and this is after the resurrection, that Jesus is spending some time with his disciples, and he takes Peter aside, and I'm reading from verse 15, 16, and 17, and he says to him, now when they had dined, Jesus said to Simon Peter, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me more than these? I mean, he was the rest of the disciples, you know, because they were walking there near the beach. Jesus had made a fish barbecue for them. So just in case you were wondering, Jesus ate fish. And he loved barbecues. And he cooks too. So anyway, they're having this discussion as friends. And he asks him, do you love me? And he uses the word agape. Do you have that highest love for me that he obviously has for him? And Peter answers and he says, oh, yes, Lord, you know that I have a brotherly love for you. He uses the word phileo. He has a brotherly love. And so Jesus says, okay, I imagine him nodding, and he says, feed my lambs. And then he says to him again, and he reads him a second time, and he says, Simon, son of Jonah. And maybe his father's name was really Jonah, or maybe he was saying he was a son of Jonah, that guy who has a bit of contempt for everyone else, other than those who are in the group of disciples, those that know Christ well. And Peter had that kind of temper, you know. He would often get angry and do things he shouldn't do. So I don't know. Some scholars say that his father's name was really Jonah. Others say that he was alluding to the spirit of Jonah, in that he is like that, or like Jonah in his prejudice against certain people. And we know that Peter was quite a prejudiced kind of guy, but he learned just like Jonah did. And he says, Simon, son of Jonah, do you have this agape love for me? And he says, yes, Lord, you know that I have this phileo love for you, this brotherly love for you. And he said, okay, feed my sheep. So the first one was feed my lambs, the little ones that come in the faith, feed them. The next one is saying, feed those that are grown up in the faith already, those that are sheep already. And then when you ask him the third time, Peter is really grieved by this, and he says to him, Simon, son of Jonah, do you love me? And Peter is grieved because he said this to him the third time, and he says, do you have that agape love for me? And Peter again says, you know all things, and you know that I only have phileo love, brotherly love. He hasn't reached that level of love yet. So maybe Jonah didn't reach that level of love yet, but it's something that God requires of us. You're going to need that agape love to carry you to the next level, to welcome in those Ninevites into our church, and to be able to share their story and bring others into the church, where there's no difference between us. No freeman or bondman, male or female, doesn't matter how they come into the church, what they look like on the outside. But if they believe in Christ, let us call them our brother and our sisters. That's what we need from our church today. They're only going to hear that message and repent like they did when Jonah gave the message. But they're going to hear it from the heart. So that's my challenge to you today, church. If ever I do send some of my Bible students this way, I hope that they will find a spiritual home with Windsor Church, and that they would feel welcome. May God bless you.